on GB News. Now, before I introduce our next guest, we just wanted to clear something up that he said earlier in the week, as we have the benefit of him joining us in person. Let's take a look.
Well, I mean, Rwanda is a different country of Congo, isn't it? It's a different country.
Yes, it is.
Yes, definitely. So you're saying if they come from a war zone in Congo, would they then be sent to Rwanda?
So that was Chris Philp on Question Time earlier in the week. I'm delighted to be joined now by the Policing Minister. He's also the Minister for Crime and Fire, Chris Philp, also the Conservative MP for Croydon South. Now, Minister, I have to clear up this moment with the Rwanda and the DRC comment that you made. I mean, have you been a bit stitched up? Presumably you do know your geography, Mr Philp.
Yeah, and I have actually flown to the DRC in the past, so it was a bit, I think, misinterpreted. I was having a little bit of trouble hearing the question, and the comment I made to the gentleman in the audience, I think, was pretty clearly a rhetorical question rather than a substantive question, as I think any fair-minded listener would conclude.
All right, fair enough. I mean, did you do GCSE geography or A-level geography, so we can clear this up even further?
I did do, I think, GCSE geography, but that was a very long time ago. That was it was 30 years ago. In fact, it was in 1994.
All right, yeah, about the time I was doing my GCSEs too. I think we must be the same age. Let's move on now and talk about.
It was 1992. In fact, GCSEs was 1992. There we are. 32
you also
years.
did your maths GCSE, Mr. Philp. But anyway, counting's never been my strong point either. Let's talk about the defection of Dan Poulter, can we? I mean, this is a loss to the Conservative Party. Yeah. It's a slap in the face for Rishi Sunak, and it doesn't say much about how a doctor working in the NHS views how the NHS has been managed under 14 years of Conservative rule.
Well, obviously, we're always sad to lose a colleague, although I haven't seen Dan around that much recently. Look, I think the Conservative record on the NHS is very good. Well, I mean, it means what I said. We've got a fantastic record on the NHS. We've got record levels of spending, £165 billion a year, even adjusting for inflation, more than we've ever spent before in history. We've got record numbers of doctors, record numbers of nurses. Just in the last year alone, the NHS has grown by 68,000 staff, and there are today 7,000 more doctors and 21,000 more nurses than there were a year ago, and the numbers are also much higher than they were in 2010. So huge investment going into the NHS, and it's showing results. The waiting lists that obviously grew up during COVID and were exacerbated by the doctors' strike are now falling on a sustained basis. They've fallen by 200,000 across the last 5 months.
OK, so what's motivated this then? Because you're painting a completely different picture of the NHS to a doctor actually working in it, who now says he can't look his patients in the face by remaining as a Conservative.
Well, I mean, obviously he's been working in the NHS in a specific place, and I'm giving you the figures for the NHS as a whole. In terms of his motivation, you'd have to ask him about that. But he says he's joining Labour because he thinks Labour will do a better job. But if you look at what Labour are doing in Wales, where Labour does run the NHS, they are doing an appalling job. Tens of thousands of people each year are fleeing the Welsh-run the Labour-run NHS in Wales to have treatment in England. The waiting lists, the proportion of the public who are on either very long waiting lists or indeed the proportion of the public in Wales on a waiting list at all is higher, materially higher than it is in England. So on any measure, the Labour Party are doing a terrible job. Well, the Labour Party are doing a terrible job running the NHS in Wales. The waiting lists in England have gone up because of COVID and because of the strikes, but they are now coming down on a sustained basis. They've been coming down over the last 5 months. The plan is working and we need to go further.
Let's talk about shoplifting. You said that the police should have a zero-tolerance approach to shoplifting, and yet we still learn that there seems to be this licence to steal up to £200 worth of goods. Have the police not listened to you as Policing Minister, Mr Philp?
Well, a quick bit of wider context, then shoplifting. So crime overall in the last year has fallen by 6%. Those figures came out last week. Overall reduction in crime, reduction in homicide as well. And of course, last year we hit record ever police numbers. Now on shoplifting specifically, just to be clear, stealing goods under the value of £200 is a criminal offence under, I think it's the Theft Act 1968. It is a criminal offence, and you can go to prison, I think, for up to 6 months for doing that. So yes, you're right. I've asked the police to take a zero tolerance approach to shoplifting because it's been going up in the UK as it has in other European countries, and I want to see a crackdown. I want to see zero tolerance. The police have now agreed to do that, and what that means in practice is always, not sometimes, but always following up leads, in particular CCTV evidence that we can now run through the facial recognition database, which with artificial intelligence is now very accurate. It means attending the scene of the crime where a suspect has been detained, for example by store security staff, where there's been an assault, or where attendance is needed to secure evidence. It means going after prolific offenders. It means going after organised criminal gangs. We've got a project called Project Pegasus that is designed to do that. So that is the plan that we've agreed with policing for a zero tolerance approach, and retailers have reported, we only implemented it a few months ago, retailers have reported seeing improvements already, but we need to actually get these crime numbers, the shoplifting numbers coming down, just like crime more widely is coming down. We need shoplifting to come down as well. We cannot tolerate it at all.
Can we talk about your conversations with Met Police Chief Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley last week? I mean, you've decided that you do have confidence in the Met boss. If you are openly Jewish, you wouldn't, would you?
Well, look, we're obviously very concerned about the Jewish community telling us they feel unsafe at times in the centre of London. And obviously the Home Secretary and I at different times have met various Jewish community leaders, as well as the police, of course, and Islamic leaders as well. So, you know, we do want to see London being safe for everybody, including and in particular the Jewish community. And that means making sure people on marches behave in a reasonable way. There have been, I think, well over 500 arrests since October the 7th. In fact, there were 2 arrests yesterday. One, an arrest of somebody who was saying anti-Semitic things to
but at the same time,
a sort of pro-Israeli supporter. So we do want those people to be protected and looked after.
But it's not equal, is it? The approach to the policing can't be equal if you now have a situation where an anti-Semitism march has had to be cancelled, and we learned this morning that the police have decided to cover over with blue tarpaulin a Holocaust memorial because they're worried about it being defaced. So actually, when Suella Braverman talked about two-tier policing, she was right, wasn't she?
Well, to be clear, the blue tarpaulin wasn't placed there by the Metropolitan Police. I think it was the Royal Parks. And actually, I think it's wrong to cover up memorials in that way, because no memorial, whether it's a war memorial or a Holocaust memorial, should need to be covered up. We need to make sure that the policing operation keeps those memorials safe. In fact, we're actually legislating, as you probably know, to make it a specific criminal offence to climb on particular protected war memorials. And I do want to see the police ensure that Jewish people are always safe. And we've had that conversation with Sir Mark Rowley this week, and we've had conversations with the Jewish community as well.
But if the Royal Parks, thank you for that correction, have had to cover it up, then they're making the conclusion that Holocaust memorials aren't safe in London under Met Chief Police Commissioner Mark Rowley. That's by definition a conclusion also that perhaps Jewish people aren't safe in London. So you're saying that you want them to be safe, but they don't feel safe.
Well, they don't feel safe, that is true, and that's why I think the police need to redouble their efforts, and we've had that conversation with the Commissioner. I know the Jewish community have as well. There have been, thousands and thousands of police officers deployed to police the marches and to police central London more generally. Well over 500 arrests now have been made as well. But what needs to happen, not every single day, day in, day out, is people from particular religious communities need to always feel safe in our country, and that is the message that the Home Secretary and I have unequivocally given to policing. And by the way, that applies to the Jewish community and to the Muslim community. Everybody should feel safe in our country, and it's the police's duty to make sure that happens.
OK, will you be continuing to review Mark Rowley's position should there be more problems with these pro-Palestinian marches? Very briefly, Mr Philp.
Well, his position hasn't been reviewed. The Home Secretary was clear that he continued to have confidence in Sir Mark, and we will continue to work closely with the Metropolitan Police to make sure, and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, because of course Sadiq Khan is ultimately the politician directly responsible for policing in London, and of course Sadiq Khan has presided over an explosion of knife crime, which is why I think he should be voted out of office on Thursday of this coming week.
All right. OK. Chris Philp, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.